Ava wrapped her thin coat tighter around her son, shielding his tiny body from the wind that screamed like a grieving spirit across the prairie. Her fingers were numb, her breath shallow, but she kept walking, step by frozen step, dragging their broken sled through knee-deep drifts. She had nothing left but this child and the raw, stubborn will not to die. Her husband had taken the horse and most of the supplies 2 nights ago, promising to return before the storm hit. But she knew, deep in her marrow, that he wasn't coming back. Not for her, not for the boy. When the blizzard rolled down from the north, it swallowed the trail and left her alone beneath a sky that had forgotten mercy. The boy whimpered in her arms, lips blue, eyes half closed. "Hold on, baby," she whispered, voice cracking. "Mama's still here." Then the wind shifted. Hoofbeats, slow, steady, deliberate, cut through the howl of the storm. At first she thought it was hallucination, her mind unraveling in the cold. But the sound grew louder, closer, until a dark shape emerged from the white, a rider cloaked in furs, feathers braided through long black hair, eyes sharp as obsidian. He dismounted without a word, kneeling beside her in the snow. "You'll die if you stay here," he said, his voice calm but edged with command. "I was born dying," she whispered, teeth chattering. "It's all I've ever done." He studied her, then the child. Without hesitation, he lifted them both into his arms. Not anymore. She wanted to fight, to ask questions, but exhaustion crushed her voice. All she saw was his face, weathered, strong, unafraid. "Who are you?" she murmured. "Tasunke Wicasa," he replied, chief of the Bear Ridge Lakota. As he carried them through the storm, the cold began to fade, not from temperature, but from the sudden, inexplicable feeling that someone had finally chosen to stand between her and the storm. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time since the snow fell, Ava believed in something other than death. She believed in the strength of the arms that held her, and in the promise she heard, silent but real. "You will not suffer again." Ava awoke to the scent of burning cedar and the feel of thick hides draped over her body. Her son was curled against her, his skin warm, his chest rising steady beneath a blanket woven in geometric red and black. The storm outside still roared, but here, inside this rounded lodge of stretched buffalo hide and stone-lined fire, there was silence, heat, and the rhythm of drums beating low in her ears, though no one played them. Across the fire sat the man who'd carried her from death's grip, now tending a pot of broth with slow, practiced movements. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "You were nearly gone," he said. "Your boy still burns with fever, but it's breaking." Ava tried to sit up, pain shooting through her spine. "I should thank you," she said, "but I don't have the words." He finally looked up, his eyes dark but not unkind. "Survival is not something to be ashamed of. You walked farther than most would crawl." She studied him. Tall, powerful, his face carved with lines of age and purpose, hair braided with leather and bone. "Why did you help us?" she asked. "Strangers." He stirred the pot slowly. "Because someone once helped my mother when she was left behind, and because no child should die in the arms of someone who was given no choice." Ava turned to her son, tears stinging her raw eyes. "He has no one else now. His father." She stopped, the words sour in her mouth. "He made his choice." "Then we make ours," the chief said. "I have told my people you will stay until the storm ends. After that, the path is yours." "And you?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why do you look at me like you've already made a promise?" He set the ladle aside, meeting her gaze across the fire. "Because I have," he said simply. In the old way, in my heart. She couldn't respond, not yet, but something shifted in her chest, like a door creaking open in a house long abandoned. As her son stirred in his sleep, and the wind howled beyond the lodge, she leaned back into the warmth and wondered, for the first time in years, what it might feel like to belong somewhere without begging for it. The next morning brought sunlight, cold but golden, spilling through the flap of the lodge. Ava stepped outside slowly, the snow glistening like crushed glass across the valley. Children laughed near the fires, women carried water in carved gourds, and hunters returned from the tree line, dragging fresh elk. The village moved like a song, every step in rhythm with the earth. She stood quietly, unsure where she belonged among it all, until an older woman approached, her face lined but open, holding a small bundle wrapped in deerskin. "Eat," the woman said in broken English. "Chief said you need strength." Inside the bundle was warm flatbread, soft and steaming. Ava took a bite and wept. Not because of hunger, but because it had been so long since someone fed her without asking what she could offer in return. The woman didn't speak further, just nodded once and left. Later, as she washed her son's face with melted snow, Tasunke Wicasa returned from the forest, a brace of rabbits in one hand, his braid streaked with frost. "You're on your feet," he said. "Good." "Your people," Eva said slowly, "they treat me like I matter." "Because you do," he replied. "You bled in the snow and still breathed. That is enough to honor." Her son stirred in the blankets and opened his eyes. "Mama," he rasped. "I'm here," she whispered, holding his hand. "We're safe." Tasunke watched quietly, then knelt beside the boy. "Do you know who I am?" he asked gently. The boy blinked. "A bear?" Tasunke smiled faintly. "Close, but I only roar when I must." Eva laughed softly, and for a moment the heaviness lifted. Later that night, as the stars pricked the sky and drums echoed faintly in the cold, Tasunke sat beside her outside the lodge. "You have not asked what happens next," he said. She looked up. "Because I don't want to hope yet." "Then let me hope for both of us," he said. "And when you're ready, I'll build something stronger than any storm can steal." She didn't speak, but she leaned into his shoulder, and he didn't move, only wrapped his cloak around both their shoulders. And in that shared silence, the first brick of something sacred was quietly laid. Eva sat by the stream's edge, her son asleep under pine boughs nearby, as she washed their clothes with numb hands and let the cold sting her into memory. The silence of this land was not empty. It was full of watching trees and whispering winds, and it told her what she'd never dared believe. You were meant to survive. Footsteps crunched behind her. She didn't need to look to know it was him. Tasunke Wicasa knelt beside her, not speaking at first, just handing her a bundle of soft leather. "I asked the elders," he said, "for a name that is yours." She looked at him, surprised. "A name." "You came with one they buried," he said. "This land gives you another." Inside the bundle was a strip of cloth dyed with elderberry, painted with a single word in Lakota symbols, Wichangpai, star. "Because you did not burn out when the dark came," he said. "You lit your own sky." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "I don't know how to carry something so sacred." "You already are," he said, voice low. "You carried a child through ice and betrayal. You carry dignity in your spine, even when bent from grief. You are more than a wife abandoned. You are a woman reborn." She touched the cloth like it might vanish. "Then let that be my name." "It already is," he said, "in my heart." That evening, as the village gathered for the winter moon blessing, Eva stood among them not as an outsider, but as Wichangpi, a name spoken aloud by the medicine woman who smudged her with sage and tied feathers into her son's hair. When her name echoed into the sky, it felt like an old burden crumbled and fell from her shoulders. Later, around the fire, Tasunke sat beside her, their arms brushing but not intertwined. She turned to him. "What do they call you?" He smiled faintly. "Tasunke Wicasa means horseman, but they also call me Tawa Owanka, the one who watches over what is his." Her voice caught. "And what is yours?" He looked at her, not with possession, but with reverence. "You, if you'll have me." She didn't answer with words. She simply reached for his hand, and the night wind wrapped around them like a vow written in stars. The peace shattered just after dawn, when a hunting party returned with eyes wide and breath ragged. "Tracks," one said. "White men, 5 riders. Guns. Heading this way." The village stilled. Tasunke Wicasa stepped from his lodge, cloak billowing behind him like a storm front. He listened without interrupting, then turned to Eva. "Does your husband ride with such men?" She stood frozen for a breath, then nodded. "If he's still alive, yes. He would bring others to finish what he started." Tasunke's jaw tightened. "Then they ride for you." She reached for her son, who clung to her leg, sensing fear in the air. "I won't let them take him," she said. "Or me." Tasunke placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't stand alone now." He called his warriors, gave quiet instructions. Some vanished into the woods. Others began to form a line along the village's edge, weapons hidden but ready. The elders began leading women and children to a cave nestled in the hills. Eva refused to go. "I'll face him," she said. "If he sees me weak again, he'll try to break me." "Then you'll stand tall," Tasunke replied, "and I will stand with you." Hours passed. The wind howled harder. Then, like ghosts emerging from the trees, the riders appeared, coats dusted with snow, rifles across their backs. Her husband led them, his face more hollow than she remembered, but his eyes still burned with bitter pride. "There she is," he snarled, pointing, "living like a savage's wife. She took my son." "He is not yours," Eva said, stepping forward. "You left him in a blizzard to die." "I left you both where you belonged," he spat. "Trash doesn't get rescued." Tasunke moved beside her. "Speak another word, and your breath will be your last." The riders hesitated, uncertain now, reading the line of warriors, the archers hidden, the calm in Tasunke's eyes. "We didn't come for war," one muttered. "Then ride away," Eva said, "because here you have no power." Her husband glared at her. "You'll regret this." She lifted her chin. "I regret ever calling you a man." With no more words, they turned and left, their threat broken not by blood, but by something far deeper. The strength of a woman no longer willing to kneel, and the man who stood so she never had to again. That night, the fire burned low but steady, and Eva sat beside Tasunke beneath a blanket of stars. Her son slept peacefully for the first time in days, curled in a buffalo hide by the lodge entrance, a red feather tied gently in his hair, gifted by the clan's oldest warrior as a sign of courage. Eva turned toward the chief, her voice quieter than the wind. "If you hadn't been there..." Tasunke looked at her, eyes dark and steady. "Then the snow would have taken you. Or worse, he would have." "I didn't know men like you still existed," she said. "Ones who don't see women as burdens or prizes." "That's because most men are taught to rule instead of serve," he replied. "But a Lakota chief is taught to listen, to protect, and never to touch what is not freely given." She stared at the fire. "You never asked about what he did to me, or what I ran from." "Because I already saw it in your spine," he said. Not what broke you, but how you carried it. Silence settled between them. Not awkward, but sacred. She reached for his hand, her fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. "I've never been chosen without being claimed," she said. "I want to know what it feels like to be kept, not conquered." He turned his hand and held hers fully, his voice low. "Then stay. Not because you must, but because you want to. And I will vow before every star that your pain ends here." Tears blurred her vision, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming weight of safety, something she had never truly tasted. "Then I will stay," she whispered. "Not as a refugee, but as Wichankpi, your equal." He touched her cheek gently. "And I, your shelter." As the fire cracked and popped, Eva leaned against his chest, letting the sound of his heartbeat lull her into something close to peace. No longer prey, no longer possession. She was a name given by stars, held by a man who understood the strength of gentleness. And in that moment, beneath sky and smoke, Eva knew the blizzard hadn't buried her. It had carved the path to the place her soul had always been walking toward. Spring crept in slowly, thawing the edges of the village with fingers of soft wind and bird song. Eva planted corn beside the elder women, her son chasing painted stones down the hillside, laughter in his lungs for the first time since snow had ruled the land. The community had folded her into its rhythm, not as charity, not as guest, but as kin. And Tasunke Wicasa, the man whose shadow once moved like thunder, now walked beside her in sunlight. They had not spoken of marriage, not in the white man's sense, but the way they moved. Sharing tools, raising her son, praying beside the morning smoke, had already spoken it to the land. One afternoon, as she taught the boy how to grind dried berries into paste, a rider returned from the far south with news. A group of settlers, pushed by railroads and greed, had begun claiming Lakota hunting grounds. Some bore badges, some rifles. All came with deeds made of lies. That evening, Tasunke sat with his council, Eva listening from the edge. "We have peace now," one said, "but peace without readiness is an invitation for slaughter." Another added, "If we do not draw a line, they will erase us with ink before a single bullet fires." Eva stepped forward, voice clear. "Then make the hollow more than a village. Make it a refuge for every tribe that's been scattered, for every woman they threw to the wild." The men grew quiet. Tasunke looked at her, not with surprise, but with pride. "You speak not as one who begs," he said, "but as one who knows what must be done." "Because I have seen what happens when no one draws the line," she said, "and I've felt what it means when someone finally does." The council voted by firelight, and by dawn, the hollow began its transformation, not into a camp, but a nation in seed. More shelters were built, scouts were sent, and word began to travel like warm wind through broken lands. There is a place where the snow doesn't win, where the bruised rise, where a woman with a child and no name becomes the star that leads others home. And Eva, Wichankpi, stood at the center of it all, not rescued, not risen, but rooted. They came in twos at first, a mother with 3 girls, eyes darting like deer, a grandfather carrying a child whose parents had vanished westward. Then came dozens more, some walking, some limping, all carrying only what hadn't been stolen. Eva stood at the edge of the hollow, greeting them with bowls of soup and words that tasted like warmth. She recognized the look in their eyes, the dazed silence of people who hadn't felt safe in years. "You'll sleep tonight," she told them, "and wake without fear." Her son stood beside her now, taller, stronger, the red feather still braided in his hair. He offered his hand to a boy who had not spoken in days. "Come on," he said. "We have a place for you." Inside the hollow, shelters rose like prayers, made from cedar, mud, and the will of women who had once thought silence was their only shield. Eva taught them how to grind grain, how to stitch hides, how to laugh again. She wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but she had learned to outlive storms, and that was a kind of strength no one could teach. One evening, a young girl stood by the fire, clutching a bone-carved doll. "My father said women should be quiet," she whispered, "that we don't get to decide things." Eva knelt beside her, taking the girl's hand. "Then your father feared your voice more than he feared war." The girl blinked. "Why?" "Because truth always sounds loudest from someone they tried to silence." That night, as flames danced against the trees, Tasunke Wicasa stood before the village and spoke one name aloud. "Wichangpi." She looked up, startled. "You are not only the star in our sky," he said. "You are the one they follow through the dark. You lead not with a blade, but with belonging. And that is why they come." The crowd nodded, some with tears, others with hands clenched to hearts. "I didn't ask for this," she said quietly, "but I will never run from it." And so, as the drums rose and the people circled close, Eva realized she had not been saved to be protected. She had been saved to lead, and her light, once nearly smothered by snow, now blazed with the power to guide others through it. The night before the equinox, Eva sat with Tasunke beneath the old pine where the first fire had been lit months ago. The stars spread overhead like a woven blanket of memory, and the scent of pine resin and distant smoke curled in the breeze. "They asked if I'll wear the white dress," she said, fingers running over the beadwork on her ceremonial tunic. "I told them no. I was buried in white once. I won't wear the color of surrender again." Tasunke smiled, his arm around her shoulders. "Then you will marry me in your strength, not their symbols." She turned to him, eyes filled with something quiet and eternal. "And do you swear?" "I do." "To never leave when the storm comes?" "I will build the shelter beside you." "To raise him," she said, nodding toward her son, "as your own?" "He already is." "And when the world burns again?" she asked, voice low. "Will we fight?" "Only if peace demands it," he said. "Only if our silence becomes a wound." She nodded, resting her forehead against his. "Then I am yours, not as a woman cast out, but as one chosen to rebuild what was broken." The next morning, the village gathered on the ridge. No priests, no paper, just the sky, the earth, and the circle of those who knew pain but chose love. Eva stood in a dress of blue and bone, her son beside her, holding the ring carved from antler. Tasunke stood across from her in a cloak painted with hawks and stars. "Today," the elder said, "we do not bind them. We bear witness to what has already been joined." When they placed their hands together, it wasn't ceremony. It was confirmation. That survival could become something sacred. That pain could be repurposed into foundation. That love wasn't what came after suffering. It was what rose from it. As drums echoed across the land, as children threw petals made of crushed bark and ash, Eva looked over the people who now called her Wichangpi. Star. She had not been rescued to be adored. She had risen to become a hearth, and Tasunke had not saved her to hold her down, but to rise with her, one breath, one vow, one dawn at a time. Years passed like steady wind through tall grass, and the hollow became a legend, spoken of in whispers among travelers, in letters never sent, in prayers mumbled by women who still dreamed of a place where pain was met with protection. Eva, now called Wichangpi in every tongue that mattered, stood before the great council fire as the harvest moon rose behind her. Her son, no longer a boy, but a man of calm strength and sharp eyes stood to her right. He wore the red feather still, but now beside a braid marked by years of peace and wisdom. "They have sent word," Tasunke said, handing her a folded letter brought by a northern scout. "Another village was burned. Survivors seek the hollow." Ava unfolded the letter slowly, her hands steady. "Then we welcome them, as we were once welcomed by fire and hands that did not ask us to explain our scars." She turned to the gathered circle, men and women who had once been wanderers, exiles, shadows. "You were not saved to hide," she said. "You were saved to become sanctuary." The crowd murmured agreement, voices like soft thunder. Tasunke stood beside her, his eyes still the same. The man who had lifted her from the snow, who had not asked what she had done, only what she wanted to become. That night, as the drums fell silent and the fire became embers, Ava stood alone beneath the same stars that once saw her near death. The blizzard never returned, not because the snow stopped falling, but because she had become the warmth it could not conquer. A hearth, a name, a life. Tasunke joined her in silence, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Do you regret never going back?" he asked. She looked at him, a small smile on her lips. "I did go back. The moment I chose not to beg anymore. The moment I stood, not for revenge, but to give others what I once prayed for." In the distance, a child's laughter rang out. A woman sang in Lakota. The wind shifted and carried the scent of cedar and hope. "Then the storm is truly behind us," Tasunke said. Ava nodded slowly. "No," she whispered. "We just built a life strong enough to walk through it." And beneath the stars, hand in hand, they watched the future they had forged glow brighter than any fire that ever tried to burn them down.